The loneliest sound on the frontier was not the wind over open land. It was the echo of one man's boots inside a house built too large for one man's heart. Fletcher Hinton had money, land, and power in Montana Territory, but when night came, none of it warmed the silence. The strange part was this. He had learned to live with that silence until one quiet choice, spoken over morning coffee, threatened to pull his whole life open like a wound. Fletcher rose at 4:30 every morning, the same way he had for years. The sky outside his window was always cold and pale at that hour. He dressed in the dark, boots first, then trousers, then a shirt that had been pressed and laid out the night before. The ranch house stood 3 stories tall, with 15 rooms and 6 fireplaces, and a dining table that could seat 20 people. Fletcher sat at the far end of it, alone, as if distance could keep him safe from wanting. At 5:15, his housekeeper brought his coffee, as she always did. Her name was Carly Moss. She was 26, with plain brown hair pulled back tight and calm gray eyes that missed nothing. She did not chatter, she did not flatter. She placed the cup down with steady hands, gave a small nod, and turned to go. "Thank you," Fletcher said. Carly paused, just long enough to show she heard him, then walked back toward the kitchen. Fletcher watched her leave, and he hated himself for noticing the exact second the room felt empty again. Outside, the ranch hands were already working by sunrise. Fletcher had 15 men on payroll and a foreman named Owen Mercer, a solid man who ran the place like a clock. The crew tipped their hats when Fletcher approached. They respected him, and they feared him a little too, because Fletcher's rules were simple: work hard, speak straight, and do not waste time. That was how Fletcher lived too. He had built his life around control. His father had taught him young that feelings were weakness, and weakness got a man buried. Fletcher believed it. He had earned his wealth the hard way. He owned 1,700 head of cattle, 4,000 acres from the creek to the mountains, and enough influence to make bankers smile when they saw him coming. On paper, he was winning, but paper could not sit with him at night. At noon, Carly brought lunch to his study, set it down, and gave the day's needs without extra words. "The pantry needs restocking," she said. "I'll need the wagon Thursday." "Take it whenever you need," Fletcher replied. "Thank you." She turned to leave, then stopped when he spoke again. "The bread is good," he said, trying to sound normal. "Tell the stove." For the first time that day, the corner of Carly's mouth lifted. It was not a full smile, but it was real. Then she left, and Fletcher stared at the closed door, longer than a man should. That evening, Fletcher attended a gathering at the Compton Ranch, the kind of social event he never enjoyed but never skipped. Business moved through parlors, just as often as it moved through banks. The men greeted him with loud voices and easy jokes, the kind men used when they wanted to pretend nothing could touch them. "Fletcher, you finally showed," said Roman Compton, red-faced and cheerful. "You had food," Fletcher answered. A few men laughed. A man named Eric Thornton leaned near the fireplace with a whiskey glass in hand, dressed sharp like he belonged in a city office. Another man, Colt McBride, grinned like trouble. "You've been scarce," Eric said. "Used to play poker with us every week. Now you stay home. What's got you so busy?" "The ranch," Fletcher said. Colt leaned forward, eyes bright. "That ranch runs itself with a foreman like Owen. You hiding a woman in that big house?" More laughter. Fletcher did not laugh. His friends wanted a story. They wanted a weakness to poke at, because it made them feel stronger. Roman clapped his hands. "Territorial ball in Helena next month. You should go. Every eligible woman in Montana will be there. Good families, good names, perfect chance to find a wife." Eric nodded. "You need a legacy, Fletcher. Heirs. What happens to all this when you're gone?" Fletcher took a slow drink of whiskey. He thought of bright smiles and shallow talk. He thought of women who would look at him the way people looked at a bank. He thought of his house at night. He thought of Carly, and he hated himself for it. "I'll think about it," he said. He rode home under hard stars, the world silent except for hoofbeats and the creak of leather. When he reached the ranch house, one lamp still burned low in the kitchen. Carly always left it for him. A covered plate waited on the table. Beside it sat a note in careful handwriting. North pasture fence fixed. 8 posts replaced. K. Facts, not feelings. Useful, not needy. Carly understood him in a way no one else tried to. The next morning at 5:15, Carly brought his coffee again. Fletcher stared into the steam as if the answer lived there. "I'm thinking of attending the territorial ball," he said. Carly paused. "That sounds proper for a man of your standing." "Roman thinks I should bring someone," Fletcher added. "Make an appearance." Quote, "I see," Carly said, and her face stayed calm, but something flickered in her eyes, quick as a shadow. "The suitable women bore me," Fletcher said before he could stop himself. Carly looked at him, and for a moment he felt like she could see straight through his ribs. "Then perhaps you should bring someone unsuitable." Fletcher blinked. "Like who?" "I wouldn't know, Mr. Hinton," Carly replied. "I don't keep company with unsuitable women." Then she walked away, leaving him sitting there with his coffee cooling and his pride stinging, and something else in his chest that felt too much like hope. 3 days later, Fletcher stood in his study, staring at the heavy cream invitation to the ball. Carly knocked and entered with fresh linens, quiet as always. Fletcher looked up, and the words came out before he could swallow them back. "Will you attend the ball with me?" The linens slipped from Carly's hands and fell to the floor. She stared at him like he had spoken a different language. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "I must have misheard you." "You didn't," Fletcher said. Carly bent to pick up the linens, taking her time, her face turned away as if she needed a second to steady herself. When she straightened, her voice was tight. "Mr. Hinton, I'm your housekeeper." "I'm aware." "Then you understand how improper this is." "I do." Carly's hands gripped the fabric until her knuckles went pale. "Then why would you ask?" Fletcher moved to the window, because it was easier to speak without looking at her. "Because every woman at that ball will want something from me," he said. "Land, money, a name. They smile at me the way people smile at a bank." He turned back. "You are the only person who looks at me like I'm just a man." Carly's breath caught. Her eyes held his, sharp and scared at the same time. "I need to think," she said at last. "Take all the time you need." Fletcher answered, trying to sound steady while his heart beat like a hammer. Carly left, and Fletcher stood alone in his study, realizing he had stepped off a cliff without knowing if there was ground on the other side. 3 days passed after Fletcher asked, and the ranch kept moving like nothing had changed. The cattle still needed water, fences still needed mending, and ledgers still demanded their cold truth. But inside the big house, something had shifted. Carly still brought coffee at 5:15. She still spoke only what was needed, yet Fletcher noticed the smallest things. The way her eyes paused on him when she thought he was not looking, as if she was measuring something she did not want to name. On the 3rd day, Carly found Fletcher in the barn while he was checking an injured horse. She did not greet him. She did not waste time. "I'll go," she said. "On conditions." Fletcher straightened so fast he nearly knocked his hat off. "Name them." "First," Carly said, steady as stone, "I will not pretend to be something I'm not. If anyone asks, I'm your housekeeper. I will not lie to make you look better." Fletcher nodded once. "Agreed." "Second," she continued, "if anyone disrespects me, I leave immediately. I will not stay where I'm not wanted." "Fair," Fletcher said. Carly hesitated, and for the first time her calm face cracked with something like fear. "Third, this doesn't change anything here. When we return, I'm still your employee. We keep proper boundaries." Something painful twisted in Fletcher's chest, but he forced himself to answer like the controlled man he had always been. "Understood." Carly nodded once like a deal had been signed. "Then I accept." The ball was 3 weeks away. Helena's winter social season was beginning, and the invitation felt like a trap made of lace and gold. Carly needed a dress, and Fletcher handed her money that was far more than needed. She argued. He insisted. Finally, she took it, but her eyes were sharp. "I'll pay you back," she said. "You absolutely will not," Fletcher replied. Carly's gaze lifted. "If we're doing this, then use my name. In public, you can't call me housekeeper." And you can't call me Miss. You'll have to call me Carly. The name felt strange on Fletcher's tongue, too personal for a man like him. Fine, he said. Carly. She winced, like hearing it changed the air. Don't expect me to look like those society women. Good, Fletcher said. I can't stand those society women. A ghost of a smile crossed Carly's face. Then we're well matched. The days that followed were the strangest Fletcher had lived in years. The routine stayed the same, but every moment felt charged. When Carly set his cup down, their fingers sometimes brushed. When Fletcher passed her in the hallway, the space between them felt too small. Neither spoke about it. Both pretended it was nothing, because admitting it would make it real. One evening, Fletcher walked into the parlor and found Carly alone, trying to waltz. She was counting softly under her breath, feet moving clumsy and unsure across the rug. "You're leading with the wrong foot," Fletcher said from the doorway. Carly jumped and spun, face heating. "I was just practicing." "Smart," Fletcher said, stepping inside. "Everyone will be dancing. If you look lost, they'll mock you. I won't give them the satisfaction." Carly's jaw tightened. "You don't have to protect me like that." Quote. "I do," Fletcher said, and surprised himself with how sure it sounded. "Come here, I'll show you." Carly stared at him like he had offered to set himself on fire. "That's not necessary." "It is," Fletcher said quietly. He moved the chairs aside and held out his hand. "It's just dancing." Slowly, Carly placed her hand in his. Her palm was warm and rough from work. Fletcher's breath caught as if he had been punched. He set his other hand at her waist. Careful, proper, nothing improper. Carly's free hand rested on his shoulder, and the simple touch felt louder than thunder. "On three," Fletcher said. "1, 2, 3. They moved. Carly was stiff at first, counting out loud and staring at her feet like the floor might betray her. Fletcher guided her patiently, keeping his voice low. "Don't look down," he said. "Look at me." Carly lifted her eyes. They were inches apart now, close enough for Fletcher to see tiny gold flecks in her gray irises, close enough to smell clean soap and lavender. "Good," Fletcher managed. "Now follow my lead." They turned slowly. Carly relaxed a little, then a little more. Their steps began to match, and for a moment, it almost felt easy. Then Fletcher stepped on her foot. "Sorry," he said quickly. Carly immediately stepped on him, hard. Fletcher flinched. "Ouch, what was that for?" "Now we're even," Carly said, completely serious. Fletcher stared, then laughed, a real laugh that surprised him. It filled the room and bounced off the walls like the house itself did not know how to handle that kind of sound. Carly's mouth curved into a true smile, and it hit Fletcher harder than any insult ever had. They kept practicing every evening after that. Each lesson was torture and salvation. Fletcher lived for the moment when his hand touched Carly's waist. Carly's hand trembled on his shoulder the first time, steadied by the second, gripped him firmly by the fifth. One night, as the lamps burned low, they stopped moving without meaning to. Fletcher's hand stayed at her waist. Carly's stayed on his shoulder. Their faces were so close, Fletcher could feel her breath. "We should stop," Carly whispered. "Yes," Fletcher said. Neither moved. Then the grandfather clock chimed 9, loud and sudden. They stepped apart like guilty children. Carly smoothed her skirt and looked anywhere but his eyes. "Thank you for the lesson," she said, formal again. "We'll practice tomorrow," Fletcher replied, voice rough. "That would be appropriate," Carly said, and fled. The night before the ball, they practiced one last time. Carly moved smoothly now. She could turn and glide and keep her head up like she belonged in any room on earth. "You're ready," Fletcher said. "I'll embarrass you," Carly replied, though her tone held less fear now and more challenge. "Impossible," Fletcher said. Carly looked up at him, and the question in her eyes was quieter than everything else. "Why are you really doing this?" Quote. Fletcher could have lied. He could have talked about politics, business, appearances, all the safe things. But he was tired. Tired of silence. Tired of pretending. Tired of living like a man who did not need anything. Because when I think about standing in a room full of people I don't care about, Fletcher said, the only person I want beside me is you. Carly's eyes widened. Her voice was a whisper. Boundaries, Fletcher. I remember, he said, and the words hurt to say. He released her waist and stepped back. Good night, Carly. Good night, she replied, but she did not move right away as he left. The next day crawled by like an injured animal. Fletcher dressed in his finest black suit, boots polished until they reflected light, cuffs shining silver. He looked like every other rich rancher heading to Helena to perform a social duty. At 6 o'clock, he waited in the front hall. The carriage stood outside, and the driver had been paid double for discretion. Fletcher's hands were steady, but his chest felt too tight. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Fletcher turned, and his mind went blank. Carly descended slowly, one hand on the railing. She wore deep blue silk, simple and elegant. Her hair was pinned back softer than usual, with small pins catching the lamplight. A small locket rested at her throat. She looked like herself, only more. Fletcher forgot how to breathe. Will I do? Carly asked, and her voice shook just slightly. You will, Fletcher said. Yes, you will. Carly glanced down and froze. Oh, no. What? Fletcher asked sharply. My shoes don't match. Fletcher looked. One shoe was slightly darker than the other. They stared at the mistake, then at each other, and Fletcher burst into laughter, deep and helpless. This is not funny, Carly said, but she was fighting a smile. It's perfect, Fletcher said, still laughing. Come on, we're fixing it. They rushed upstairs, searching Carly's small room until they found a matching pair. Carly sat on the edge of the bed, struggling with laces, and Fletcher dropped to one knee without thinking to help buckle them. His fingers brushed her ankle. They both froze. Fletcher, Carly whispered. He looked up, and her expression was open in a way he had never seen before, wanting, scared and honest all at once. Fletcher stood too fast. We should go. Yes, Carly said, voice tight. The ride to Helena took 2 hours. Carly sat across from Fletcher with hands folded in her lap, staring out at the dark landscape as if it could calm her. The carriage rattled over rough roads. Nervous? Fletcher asked. Terrified, Carly answered. Fletcher swallowed. Me too. Carly blinked at him. You're never nervous. I'm always nervous, Fletcher said. I just hide it better. Then the carriage hit a deep pothole. Carly lurched forward with a gasp, straight into Fletcher's chest. His arms came up on instinct, catching her. One hand at her waist, one at her back. Their faces were inches apart. The lantern flickered, painting gold across Carly's cheekbones. Fletcher could feel her heart racing, and his own pulse answered like a drum. Carly's lips parted. Fletcher's gaze dropped to her mouth. Fletcher, she breathed, barely audible. Every part of him wanted to close the distance. He wanted to kiss her so badly his hands shook. But Carly had trusted him. She had said yes because she believed he would respect her. So Fletcher did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He gently set her back on her seat, his hands lingering 1 second longer than they should have. Sorry, he said roughly. Terrible roads. Yes, Carly whispered, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. Terrible roads. They did not speak again until the lights of Helena appeared ahead, bright and glittering, and the music from the ballroom floated into the night like a promise and a warning at the same time. They reached Helena just after 8. Carriages lined the street outside the Grand Hotel, and music spilled through the tall windows like a living thing. Fletcher stepped down first, then offered Carly his hand. Her fingers trembled when she took it, but she kept her chin high. If you want to leave at any time, Fletcher said quietly, say the word. I know, Carly answered. Now stop trying to rescue me before we even go inside. Fletcher almost smiled. Almost. Then he noticed a loose button on his coat hanging by a thread. Damn it, he muttered. Carly glanced down. A rich man with 4,000 acres defeated by a button. I own half this county, Fletcher said, annoyed, and a button is about to ruin me. Carly opened her small bag and pulled out a needle and thread like she had planned for this exact moment. She stitched it back on right there in the entry hall, hands steady, face calm. Fletcher watched her, struck by how natural the closeness felt. When she bit off the thread, she looked up. "There," Carly said. "Crisis averted." "I'd be lost without you," Fletcher replied. "Yes," Carly said, plain and honest. "You absolutely would be." Then they entered the ballroom together, and the air changed. The room glittered like a box of jewels tipped into the open. Huge chandeliers burned overhead, their candles reflecting in crystal. Men in polished boots and dark coats stood in tight circles. Women moved like bright birds in silk. Every laugh sounded practiced. Every smile felt like a trade. Fletcher scanned the crowd and spotted his friends near the refreshment tables. Roman Compton stood at the center of it, loud as always. Eric Thornton stood nearby with bankers. Colt McBride was already dancing, grinning like he owned the night. Roman saw Fletcher and lifted his glass. "Fletcher, you actually came." Then Roman's eyes landed on Carly at Fletcher's arm and his face froze. Fletcher spoke before Roman could. "This is Carly Moss, my companion for the evening." Roman's mouth twitched like he was holding back laughter. "How unexpected! Miss Moss, is it?" Quote, "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Compton," Carly said, calm and steady. Eric and Colt drifted over, drawn by scandal. Eric's eyes moved over Carly the way a man inspected livestock, cold and measuring. Colt's grin sharpened. "Well," Eric said smoothly, "you've certainly made an interesting choice." "Bold," Colt corrected, his voice full of mockery. "Very bold." Fletcher felt Carly stiffen beside him, her fingers tightened on his sleeve. For one breath, Fletcher wanted to pull her away and leave, not because he was ashamed, but because he hated seeing her treated like something less. But Carly did not shrink. She stood tall in her deep blue dress, eyes level, shoulders steady. Roman chuckled. "We're all very enlightened here, aren't we, gentlemen?" Their laughter was quiet, but it was cruel. Fletcher knew what was happening. By morning, the whole territory would be talking about the rich cowboy who brought hired help to the governor's ball. Carly's voice came low, close to his ear. "We should leave." Fletcher looked down at her. "Not a chance." "They're laughing at you." "Let them," Fletcher said. "Are you all right?" Carly's throat moved as she swallowed. Then she lifted her chin higher. "I warned you." "You did," Fletcher replied. "And I chose this anyway." Carly's eyes flashed with something fierce. "Then let's give them something to really talk about." Before Fletcher could answer, Carly stepped forward into the room, moving like she belonged there, not like she was borrowing courage. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. The women who had practiced their smiles all day suddenly looked uncertain. The men who had dismissed Carly at first glance looked again. Roman's wife, Camilla, approached with a smile sharp as a knife. "Miss Moss, what an unusual dress. Did you make it yourself?" Carly looked at her without blinking. "No. A seamstress in Helena made it. Mrs. Pratt on 5th Street. She does excellent work for reasonable prices. I can give you her name if you'd like." Camilla's smile cracked for half a second, and Fletcher had to cough to hide his laugh. A young man stepped up, nervous and polite. "Miss Moss, would you care to dance?" Carly glanced at Fletcher. Fletcher nodded once. "Thank you," Carly said, "but I promised this dance to Mr. Hinton." Fletcher extended his hand. Carly took it, and they stepped onto the dance floor together. The orchestra played a waltz. Fletcher placed his hand at Carly's waist, and the world narrowed. The mockery, the gossip, the bright crowd, it all faded at the edges. Carly moved with the skill they had practiced. She did not stumble. She did not look down. She looked at Fletcher. "They're staring," Carly murmured. "Good," Fletcher answered. They turned slowly, then faster, moving in clean rhythm. Fletcher could feel Carly's heartbeat through silk. He could see the pulse at her throat. Carly's hand tightened on his shoulder, and Fletcher knew his own face was giving him away. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. "Fletcher," Carly whispered, breath unsteady. "I can't breathe when you look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm the only thing you see." "You are," Fletcher said, and he meant it. The waltz ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Fletcher and Carly stood there for a second too long, still holding each other, until Carly stepped back with visible effort. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were too bright. "I need air," she said. Fletcher followed her out to the terrace. Cold night air hit them. Carly gripped the stone railing and drew in sharp breaths like she had been running. Fletcher stood close but did not touch her. "You all right?" he asked. Carly let out a tight laugh. "Do you know what you just did in there?" "I danced with you." Quote, "You looked at me like you were forgetting every rule you ever made," Carly said, voice shaking. Everyone saw. "To hell with them," Fletcher replied. Carly turned and faced him. "You should care. Your reputation matters." "My reputation has never kept me warm," Fletcher said. "You do." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Carly's eyes filled. "We can't." "I know," Fletcher said, stepping back a half step to give her space. "But for tonight, can we just be two people at a ball?" "Nothing more complicated than that." Carly stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "For tonight." They returned to the ballroom, and the night kept testing Carly, but she handled it every time. A banker began bragging about cattle prices, and Carly corrected his numbers calmly, using facts she had learned from Fletcher's books. The men around him blinked, impressed. A serving tray crashed to the floor, and while society ladies stared like it was a crime, Carly helped the embarrassed servant pick up the mess without a single cruel word. When a necklace clasp broke, Carly repaired it with needle and thread from her bag, and the woman who had once sneered at her suddenly looked grateful. At dinner, a proud man leaned back too far, and his chair collapsed under him. The whole table went silent, waiting for laughter. Carly stood and offered him her chair without a moment of hesitation. "Please," she said warmly. This one seemed sturdier. The man's face burned, but Carly's kindness gave him a way to stand up with dignity. A joke floated across the table, and the laughter that followed included him instead of crushing him. Fletcher watched Carly sit back down like nothing had happened, and he felt something deep and steady in his chest. He did not just want her. He admired her. Near midnight, they finally left. The carriage rolled through dark streets, the lantern swaying overhead. Carly removed her shoes with a quiet sigh and struggled with the buckles. Fletcher knelt to help, fingers clumsy. Carly laughed under her breath. "The man who scares half of Montana is defeated by a shoe." Quote, "These buckles are cursed," Fletcher muttered. "Or you're not as capable as you think," Carly teased. Fletcher looked up at her, grin pulling at his mouth. "Are you mocking me?" "Absolutely," Carly said. Then her laughter faded as Fletcher's hands lingered on her ankle one heartbeat too long. The air thickened. Carly's breath caught. Fletcher's chest tightened. "Don't," Carly whispered. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like you're about to do something we'll both regret," Carly said, voice trembling. Fletcher released her ankle and sat back, forcing himself to breathe. "Would you regret it?" Quote. Carly swallowed hard. "I don't know. That's what terrifies me." The rest of the ride passed in silence, so charged it felt like lightning trapped in a box. At the ranch house, Fletcher helped Carly down from the carriage. At the door, she turned to him, hair slightly loose, dress stained faintly from the night, eyes shining with exhaustion. "Good night, Fletcher," she said softly. "Good night," Fletcher replied. Carly took one step, then stopped and turned back, like she was fighting herself. "Tonight changed things," Carly whispered. "I know," Fletcher said. "I don't know what to do with that." "Neither do I," Fletcher admitted. Carly nodded slowly, then slipped inside, leaving Fletcher alone in the cold dark with the terrible truth that nothing would ever be simple again. 3 days later, a letter arrived for Carly. Fletcher noticed it at breakfast because the envelope looked expensive, sealed with blue wax. Carly stared at it like it might bite. She did not open it in front of him. She took it away with her hands too steady. Fletcher tried not to think about it. He failed all day. That evening he found Carly in the kitchen, the letter open on the table. Her face was pale. "What is it?" Fletcher asked, voice tight. Carly looked up, eyes strange. My aunt died. In Boston. I'm sorry, Fletcher said quietly. I never met her, Carly replied. My mother's sister. They were estranged. Her fingers touched the paper gently. She left me everything. Her house. Her savings. Not a fortune, but enough. Fletcher felt the floor tilt beneath him. Enough for what? Carly's voice went hollow. Enough to leave. Enough to start over somewhere nobody knows me. Enough to have choices. Silence filled the kitchen. The clock ticked loud. Outside, the wind rattled the window. Fletcher forced himself to speak. You should take it. Carly's head snapped up. What? You should take it, Fletcher repeated, voice rough. And you should go. Carly stood so fast her chair scraped. You're trying to get rid of me. I'm trying to give you what you deserve, Fletcher said. If you stay here without choices, people will always say you stayed because you had to. But if you have freedom, if you can walk away, and you still choose this place, then it means something. Carly's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You're not making this easy. Should I? Fletcher asked. Yes, Carly whispered, furious and hurt at once. You should tell me to stay. You should say something that makes the choice simple. Quote. Fletcher stepped closer, then stopped himself. He did not reach for her. He wanted to, but he would not trap her with his wanting. It's not simple, he said, and I won't be the reason you give up freedom. Carly stared at him like he had just stabbed her, then walked out of the kitchen without another word. The next week was torture. Carly prepared to travel to Boston. She hired a temporary housekeeper. She packed a trunk. She moved through the house like a ghost. Fletcher threw himself into work, writing fence lines until his legs ached, reading contracts until his eyes burned, doing anything to avoid watching her leave. 2 nights before her departure, Fletcher couldn't sleep. He found Carly in the kitchen drinking tea by lamplight. Can't sleep either? She asked. No, Fletcher said, sitting across from her. Carly stared into her cup. I've been thinking about what you said, about choices. Fletcher's hands tightened. And? You were right, Carly said slowly. I need to know that if I stay, it's because I want to, not because I have nowhere else to go. She lifted her eyes to him. But you need to know something too. What? Fletcher asked. Carly's voice dropped. The reason I'm scared isn't Boston. It's not money. It's you. Fletcher's breath caught. Me? The way I feel when you're near, Carly admitted, shaking. The way I want things I have no business wanting. The way you've become necessary. She gave a broken little laugh. I thought about leaving forever, just disappearing because it would be easier than feeling this much. Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand. Carly let him. If you go, Fletcher said, and you decide to stay there, I'll understand. I'll hate it, but I'll understand. And if I come back, Carly whispered, then I'm never letting you go again. Fletcher's fingers tightened around hers. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, Carly said. Carly left for Boston the next Tuesday. Fletcher drove her to the train station himself. On the platform, surrounded by strangers, they stood too close, pretending they were not. How long? Fletcher asked. 2 or 3 weeks, Carly replied. That's a long time. Yes, Carly said softly. The whistle blew. Carly lifted her bag, and Fletcher's chest felt carved out. Whatever you decide, Fletcher said, voice rough. I'll respect it, but these months with you have been the least lonely of my life. Carly's eyes shimmered. If you make me cry on a train platform, I'll never forgive you. Then she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek quick as a spark, and before Fletcher could react, she was gone, swallowed by the train and the crowd. The ranch house went silent again, but now the silence was louder because Fletcher knew what it could feel like to have her there. The days dragged. The temporary housekeeper was efficient, but the house felt wrong. Fletcher ate food that tasted like nothing. He worked until late and still could not sleep. Even Owen Mercer noticed. You're miserable, he told Fletcher bluntly in the barn. I'm fine, Fletcher lied. You're a terrible liar, Owen said. You let her go without fighting. Fletcher stared at him. I gave her freedom. Quote. Owen shook his head. Love without risk is just polite affection. And you are not a polite man, Fletcher. Those words stayed in Fletcher's skull like a nail. On the 23rd day, a carriage rolled into the yard. Fletcher stepped out of the barn so fast, his heart nearly broke his ribs. Carly stood there, dusty from travel, hair windblown, eyes bright and steady. They stared at each other across 20 feet of dirt. "You came back," Fletcher said, voice rough. "I came back," Carly answered. Fletcher swallowed. "Why?" Carly walked toward him slowly. "Because I went to Boston. I saw the house. It was beautiful. I could have lived there." She stopped in front of him, close enough for him to feel her warmth. "But every morning I woke up alone, and every night I ate dinner in silence, and it felt empty because you weren't there." Fletcher's hands clenched. "Carly." "I sold the house," Carly said. "I kept the money, but I'm investing it here, not as an employee." She lifted her chin. "As a partner, equal shares, equal decisions. If you'll have me." Quote, Fletcher could not breathe for a moment. Then he stepped forward, cupped her face in both hands, and let the truth come out at last. "I love you," Fletcher said. "I should have said it sooner." Carly's eyes filled, but she smiled through it. "Then stop talking and kiss me." Fletcher kissed her like a man finding water after weeks in the desert. Deep, desperate, relieved. Carly's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him close like she was afraid he might vanish. When they broke apart, Fletcher pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me." Carly let out a shaky laugh. "I have conditions." "Name them," Fletcher said. "I keep my independence," Carly said. "We make decisions together." "And you ask properly, on one knee." Fletcher stared at her, then dropped to one knee right there in the dirt outside the barn, not caring who saw. "Carly Moss," Fletcher said, voice steady, "will you marry me and save me from a lifetime of loneliness?" Carly pretended to think, then smiled wide and real. "Yes." Winter deepened around the ranch, but the house did not echo the way it used to. It filled with laughter and warmth, with the sound of two people choosing each other on purpose. Fletcher had walked into the ball wealthy and lonely, and the world had mocked him for it. But when Carly walked in beside him, the mockery turned into silence, and the silence turned into something else. Because the rich cowboy was not the one who saved the maid. The maid was the one who saved the cowboy.